So if you did not hear that, I was just giving an introduction about Rabbi Akiva a little bit and why it is that we might know quite a bit about his life and death and his support of the Bar Kokhba and his involvement in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was a devastating time for the Jewish community. The estimates that I read were about a third of the Jewish population were killed in that rebellion. So just a complete destruction and catastrophe for the community. And Rabbi Akiva was one of those who was put to death as a result of that. So I think that's in part why we have so much material about his life and especially his death. And I will also say that these are rabbinic accounts. So I don't know how historically accurate they are. But I think it's important to look at these and ask, why are these included in our rabbinic canon? Why are these included in the Mishna and the Talmud? Even if there are differing stories, what does it teach us today that the people who were creating these documents felt it necessary to include these stories of Rabbi Akiva, especially when he was such a giant of his age, and then also had such a failure of supporting a false Messiah. So I thought that we would start by actually first looking at how Rabbi Akiva became Rabbi Akiva. So he was, before Rabbi Akiva, he was Akiva ben Yosef, and by all accounts came to Torah learning and Jewish study at a late age. So it's not that he was a young prodigy, but somebody who it took quite a while to find his spot and to find his Torah learning, and so we'll take a look at his beginnings and kind of go through some of his how he rose to prominence, and then also some tales about his death as well, and look at some of his wisdom that he shared during his life. He was arguably the most important sage of his time. He was certainly on the all-star team, if he was not the MVP. For whom that is a good metaphor, and so his teaching is very important and influential, and it seems like he had many students as well. So he had influence long after his death. So I'm going to. I was just looking at a couple of things in the chat, but.
Not for you.
Okay, not for me.
Yeah.
All right, great. I love that. So I'm going to share texts on this screen. So if you would like to see them instead of just hear them, I can turn that way. And the way this version of the Talmud works, this is hopefully a more clear version of the Talmudic text, which tends to be quite terse. So the bolded text is the literal translation of what's in the Talmud, and the unbolded text is there to clarify the text itself. And so that's what's not actually in there, but hopefully makes it more clear what the rabbis are actually saying. So it says that Rabbi Akiva was first a shepherd, right? That he was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Savua. And there's an account that says that Ben Kalba Savua was one of the 4 wealthy men in Jerusalem, and that is very, very high status person. But Akiva was only his shepherd. The daughter of Ben Kalba Savua saw that Akiva was humble and refined, and she said to him, "If I betroth myself to you, will you go to study hall to learn Torah?" He said to her, yes. So she became betrothed to him privately and sent him off to study. Her father, this is Ben Kalba Sabua, the very wealthy man, heard this and became angry, and he removed her from his house and took a vow prohibiting her from benefiting from his property. So Akiva, because of his humility and just his nature, attracts the daughter of this wealthy man who says that she will marry him on the condition that he goes and studies Torah. So this is, I love this story because it's a very odd one for the beginning of this great Torah sage, right? That the credit is actually given to the woman who would become his wife for encouraging him to do that and conditioning their marriage on the fact that he would go and study Torah and become this great sage that he eventually became. And so, you know, we don't get a lot of stories in the Talmud of women, and especially of women who have this kind of influence. And so I think it's a nice place to start, at least from my perspective. And so she's going against her father, so it's a little juicy in that respect. So that's from Ketubot 62 feet from this part of the Talmud, the beginning of Rabbi Akiva, right? And then I inserted this piece from Nidarim, from a different part of the Talmud that talks about how they lived, right? What their life was like, given that her father had said, you don't get to benefit from any of my wealth. So it says that in the winter, they would sleep in a storehouse of straw, and Rabbi Akiva would gather strands of straw from her hair. Right, so we have this, I'd say lovely, sort of like romance novel scene, right, of them lying down in the barn and picking straw out of her hair, and that's just how in love they were, that it didn't matter where they were or how much money they had, that they were together. And so he said to her, if I had the means, I would place on your head a Jerusalem of gold, a type of crown. Elijah the prophet came and appeared to them as a regular person and started calling and knocking on the door. He said to them, give me a bit of straw, as my wife gave birth and I do not have anything on which to lay her. Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, see this man who does not even have straw. We should be happy with our lot, as we at least have straw to sleep on. Even in this downtrodden moment, right, Akiva is finding a way to have thanks for what he does have, and so maybe we can start seeing the glimmer of the sage he would become, the teachings that he would offer, in that things could be worse. And I think we'll see this theme as we go through some other texts of very dark moments. Right, he did not live necessarily in a happy time for the Jewish people. That in these dark moments, he's able to see some light. And that's a theme that runs throughout many of these texts. The dates for his life, I forgot to mention, were probably around the year 50 to about 135 of the Common Era. What happened in between those dates?
Destruction of the temple.
Thank you. The destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, which was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era. So Akiva presumably was about 20 years old. So that, a devastating time for the Jewish community, especially in Jerusalem and in Israel, but a calamity for the Jewish world at that time. And so that is during Akiva's lifetime, and also part of what led to the Bar Kokhba rebellion and the Jewish community trying to take back authority from the Romans, given that the Romans had destroyed their temple and had entirely changed what it meant to be Jewish and how to worship, how to be in community. Right, so much of that was focused on the sacrificial system, which required the temple, and that was no longer. So that's where the rabbinic project really took hold and went from there. Of focusing more on prayer and on study and on interpretation of Jewish text and law rather than on sacrifices. So Akiva was alive for that tumultuous time in Jewish history. So another text that talks about how Rabbi Akiva came to be Rabbi Akiva. This one, not from the Mishna or from the Talmud, but from another rabbinic text called Avot the Rabbi Natan. And so this one, right, what were Akiva's beginnings? It said up to the age of 40, he had not yet studied a thing. So again, not somebody who started at the age of 3 with honey on a sheet of paper with the olive bed on it. That he hadn't studied anything up to this age. At one time, while standing by the mouth of a well in Lida, he inquired, "Who hollowed out this stone?" And was told, "Akiva, haven't you read that?" And now they quote the book of Job, that water wears away stone. It was water falling upon it constantly day after day. At that, Rabbi Akiva asked himself, "Is my mind harder than stone? I will go and study at least one section of Torah." And so he sees what's going on in the natural world, is taught about how little by little, right, erosion happens, change happens little by little, and he said, even though my mind might be like stone, right, that it hasn't had any Torah in it yet, it's not as hard as this stone. It can be influenced by Torah. So he says, "I'll go and study at least one section of Torah." He went directly to a schoolhouse, and he and his son began reading from a child's tablet. Rabbi Akiva took hold of one end of the tablet and his son the other end. The teacher wrote down Aleph and Bet for him, and he learned them, Aleph to Tav, and he learned them the book of Leviticus, and he learned Gitz. He went on studying until he learned the whole Torah. So little by little, right, drop by drop, sort of like the stone, and starting with Aleph and Bet, eventually he learns until he knows the whole Torah.
I have a question about the chronology.
Yes, don't we all?
When he is proposed to by his future wife, she said the condition is that you go study Torah. But now they already have a child and he just started.
Right,
That doesn't add up.
it doesn't need to. Well, so these are two different texts, right?
Oh,
One is from the Talmud, one is from Avot Rabbi Natan. I tried to do it kind of in chronological order,
Right.
And we'll see this with texts about his death as well. They don't all line up.
Okay.
And so that's why I don't know what is historically accurate. And so we can ask, why do we have these different versions of when Akiva started Torah learning? What led to him wanting to learn Torah, right? Is it his wife encouraging him to do it? Is it that he's just sort of comes to this conclusion? We don't know. But I think it's important that we have these different stories and we can look and try to take the lessons from each one. But right, there's not a clear chronological order here that we can draw.
I was gonna say, maybe he's a procrastinator. And so she wanted him to go study Torah when they first got married, but it took until he had the kid before he actually went ahead. So that could be too.
That could be it. But there was also the vision of the erosion of the rock.
Right, the erosion of the rock, right? So you could try to make it work, right? If you were making a novel version of his life and try to incorporate all the texts and say, okay, so she had this first condition, right? We know that they were poor, so maybe he didn't have money to go study Torah. Maybe he was too intimidated by how much there was to learn, and so life happened, and now he has a son. He happens to be by this body of water, and this reminds him of the promise that he made to his wife.
Right, right. It could add up.
It could add up. We need to make those connections, because they're not gonna make for us. That's why, did any of this actually happen? We don't know. But we have these stories, and so what do we gather from that, right? From these are what we got, and some people thought that it was important enough to tell these stories about Akiva and to share them and pass them on. So it continues. Then he went and sat before Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua. My masters, he said, revealed the sense of Mishna. When they told him one halakha, that was one Jewish law, he went off to reason with himself. This olive, he wondered, what was it written for? That bet, what was it written for? This teaching, what was it uttered for? He kept coming back, he kept inquiring of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua until he reduced his teachers to silence. So he is, getting some teaching from some, you might say, Gidolei Hador, some giants of the generation, right, of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Joshua. They are his teachers, so they definitely have some weight behind them. But they are teaching him, it seems, fairly basic things, and he is really analyzing each and every little bit of it and coming back and asking questions. He's curious, right? He's persistent. And he uses logic and reason to really look at things from all different sides. And he does this so much so that even these greats of the generation are eventually have nothing else to say to him. Right? They're reduced to silence by how much he has looked at this one halakha. So gives you a sense of how well regarded Rabbi Akiva became and how authoritative his teachings and his rulings eventually were. That even in his origin story, he's shown as perhaps doing even more than these great teachers from the generation behind him. We go sort of back to Ketubot, right? So I inserted a couple of texts in between one section of this section of the Talmud of Ketubot, and now I'm coming back to it because it seems like he's now studying. But if we wanted that narrative, right, that I would not have included that piece about the stone in the water. And so if you want to see just how the Talmud in one chunk deals with Rabbi Akiva at his start, you would just go from the part where his wife said that she would marry him if he went to study to this part right here.
Right.
So Akiva went and sat for 12 years in the study hall. When he came back to his house, he brought 12,000 students with him. Not bad. As he approached, he heard an old man saying to his wife, "For how long will you lead the life of a widow of a living man, living alone while your husband is in another place?" He's not just going to the study hall and coming home at night. He has gone out for 12 years. And she said to him, if he would listen to me, he would sit and study for another 12 years. When Rabbi Akiva heard this, he said, "I have permission. I can do this." So he went back and sat for another 12 years in the study. When he came back, he brought 24,000 students with him. So he doubled his students and he doubled the amount of years he was away from his wife. His wife heard and went out toward him to greet him, and her neighbors said, "Borrow some clothes and wear them, as your current apparel is not appropriate to meet an important person." She said to them, "A righteous man understands the life of his beast." Not a great text. I'll just put that out there. When she came to him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants pushed her away as they did not know who she was. And he said to them, "Leave her alone, as my Torah knowledge and yours is actually hers." So we have, on the one hand, this pretty problematic text from Proverbs where she compares herself with a beast. But on the other hand, we have Rabbi Akiva who's saying, that everything that is mine and everything students that belongs to you is actually hers. So it's a pretty big statement from this now great rabbinic sage of giving this credit to his wife.
Does she get named?
Does she get named? Not that I know of. Actually. So, wait. I think it might be Rachel. I think so. I don't know. I can't tell you where I know that from, but that's in my head. It's like Akiva. So I think so. So we have this, meteoric rise to power and influence, right? So Rabbi Akiva is now Rabbi Akiva. Because his wife allowed him the time to become this great sage, right? To spend 24 years away in the house of study and to gain this prominence. So how's this sitting
Google
with you?
says it's Raquel.
It's Raquel. Okay, that's where I know it. That's where I know it from, Rabbi Akiva. So this is Akiva's origin story, right? This is how the Talmud at least says he came to be, and how the support that he had at home is actually what allowed him to become a rabbi. So on the one hand, I like that the credit is actually given to Rachel. But on the other hand, it sounds like the rabbis are saying, how do you become great? Only if you have somebody who will say goodbye to you. You have a wife at home who will say goodbye and let you leave for 24 years at a time. And if you really want to be great, then you're going to have to go and do that. So is that the message that the Talmud is trying to get across, saying like, here's how you become like Rabbi Akiva, you leave your family? Or is it saying, look at what her desire for him to become great and her belief in him to become great is actually what allowed him to become great. That it wasn't necessarily something innate in him, is that she supported him and he didn't do this alone. So I think you can kind of look at both sides of it. I'm still trying to figure out where I fall on how I read this text. Please.
I think the peace comment was her knowing her audience of like, clearly her neighbors don't think very much of her. So I think if she went out and said, no, I'm his beloved wife that he cares so much about, of course he wants to see me as I am, they would have been like, no, he doesn't. So that's why she kind of like lowers herself to like, no, like I belong to him, therefore I can see him at whatever state he would take me in, kind of a thing. It's kind of humbling herself because she had to in order just to like make her way through the crowd, kind of a thing, like be allowed to see him.
It sort of reminds me of, let's say that Rabbi Akiva was a deadbeat dad. It's the same criticism sometimes thrown at the Buddha. So he was also a deadbeat dad. He had a child and went away for many years. So it's just it's an interesting theme that's something I see in religious traditions.
Yeah. Right, we see him maybe like as a family member, he's sort of caressing Rachel in the barn and he's learning alphabet along with his son. But we also see him like, go away, presumably not be around his family for a big amount of time. Which is, I would say, problematic, right? At least from my perspective. Did I miss a hint? Anyone at home? I want to make sure I'm not over.
I actually sent something in the chat saying if they wanted to join to unmute, so, yeah.
Great. All right, so one more piece, this one just from the next page in Ketubot, so it's part of the same narrative, is Ben Kalbas of coming around now to this marriage. Right, in the meantime, her father heard that a great man had come to town. He said, I will go to him, maybe he will nullify my vow and I will be able to support my daughter. He came to him to ask about nullifying his vow, and Rabbi Akiva said to him, did you vow thinking that this husband would become a great man? He said, if I had believed he would know even one chapter or even one halakha, I would not have been so harsh. He said to him, I am he, I am Akiva. Right, Ben Kalba Savua fell on his face and kissed his feet and gave him half of his money. The Gemara relates Rabbi Akiva's daughter did the same thing for Ben Azai, who was also a simple person. She caused him to learn Torah in a similar way by betrothing herself to him and sending him off to study. This explains the folk saying that people say, the you follows the you, the daughter's actions are the same as her mother's. The first part of this text, right, is Ben Kalba Savua coming to this great sage who he knows is, who doesn't know who is Akiva, and saying, please, I vowed against supporting my daughter, take that vow away, undo it for me. And Akiva, right, in this piece of dramatic irony, it starts questioning him. And it reveals himself to Ben Kalba Savua, who is sort of in awe, it seems, of Akiva and therefore is generous with his money, right? So now Akiva not only has weight as a sage and the support of a wife at home, but now he has quite a bit of money, right? That will presumably allow him to study and teach and not worry about subsistence and sustaining his family. Now that he's out of the baby drops down, he's out of the house of study, that he doesn't have to worry about that piece. And might make him be more influential, presumably. And then we get the second piece that Akiva's daughter, right, was sort of inspired by her mother, right, and did the same for another rabbi, who's Ben Azai. And we get this saying that sort of like mother, like daughter, right? That's its a rabbinic way of saying that. Except she, of course, because it's a patriarchal text, of course it's not she. So this is sort of like the end of the origin story of Rabbi Akiva and sort of the what we would say the nechemta, right? The resolution that even his father-in-law came around and made things good that hadn't been. And we know that that this would even inspire Rabbi Akiva's children to do similar things and to make greatness for generations beyond. So this is how the rabbis at least view how Rabbi Akiva came to be and the story that they tell themselves about how he became great and what it takes to become a great like Rabbi Akiva. So from here, we'll go and see some of his greatness according to the rabbis. So before we jump in, I want to make sure if anyone had any questions or things to say about the origin story and this chapter of Akiva's life before we move on to another chapter, we have a moment to.
Wikipedia lists the name of his wife is Rachel.
Yes.
I'm wondering. Because I'm wondering why his wife was so okay with him gone for 24 years, like why she sent him off to begin with. It seems like a pretty big jump. To be like, I'll only marry you if you study. I don't really know what she gains from that.
Has anybody seen Jewish Matchmaking on Netflix?
Yeah.
So do you remember, it was my favorite couple in the series, though it was probably the most religious Orthodox couple, and she said, right, if you're Orthodox, you're dating to get married, right? So like a 3 month time frame. So they were a great match, but she said, I'm not willing to go on a 4th date with you. Which would probably escalate to marriage simply because you don't pray enough in the morning. And it was so, and then it shows him going to his rabbi and being like, look. The rabbi's like, it might be helpful to think about this as marrying spiritually up and that you could become more. And he was like, I'm already religious, like I want, he thought of it as a burden. And then it showed them like, they just seem so perfect, like your heart hurt to see them, and they both said goodbye, because she was like, I want someone that is more religious like my brothers and father.
Right, so I think it talks about what does status mean in this society, right? What is something that's worthy of being proud of? And for her, and definitely in the minds of the rabbis, right, great Torah learning and being a great sage is something to be proud of, right? That is something to aspire to. So why would she be okay with it? Because maybe she had faith that he would become a great sage, and that learning Torah was something that one would value in his spouse. And that you could say that, maybe she wanted him to have a greater connection with God, or, you could kind of imagine what that argument would be. But remember, this is the rabbis telling the story of Rabbi Akiva. So, in that space, absolutely, something that was valued was great Torah learning and people who had the support that would allow them to give that time and energy to the Torah learning. And so she is seen as praiseworthy, absolutely, by the rabbis, because she allowed Rabbi Akiva to leave her behind and become this great sage, and because she supported him along the way. So that is definitely from their own perspective as to why she may have been okay with that. Again, what the reality of it was, we don't know. What she actually thought about him being away, if he was actually away for that long, we don't know. But this is how the rabbis should read that. So we should keep that. That's who gets to tell the story. So this is a story that speaks to just how well regarded Rabbi Akiva was in his day. This is a story I think I've taught at other times here, and I don't have in its entirety because it's a little bit long, but I'll tell you how it ends, even though it's not included here. And because it talks about Rabbi Akiva's death, which we will be dealing with in a little bit. And so this is starts with Moses. It doesn't start with Akiva. So Yehuda says that Rav says, so they're saying, here's where we heard the story. Right? When Moses ascended on high, he found the Holy One of Blessing sitting and tying crowns on the letters of the Torah. Right? So this is at Mount Sinai. Moses sees God writing the Torah, and if you look inside of a Torah scroll, you see that the letters have flourishes on them, right? Little crowns and things that aren't necessary but are there maybe for decoration or for some other reasons. So Moses said before God, Master of the universe, who is preventing you from giving the Torah without these additions? Meaning, what's taking you so long, right? Why? You're the one who's given the Torah. Why aren't you just giving it? And so God said to him, there is a man who is destined to be born after several generations, and Akiva ben Yosef is his name. He is destined to derive from each and every thorn of these crowns, mounds upon mounds of halachot, of Jewish laws. And it is for his sake that the crowns must be added to the letters of the Torah. So why are those crowns there? Because God knows that Akiva is going to be there many generations in the future, and that he's going to be able to make meaning and discover the hidden meaning behind these crowns. That nobody else is going to be able to figure out. And so Moses said before God, Master of the universe, show him to me. God said to him, essentially turn around, return behind you. Moses went and sat at the end of the 8th row in Rabbi Akiva's study hall and did not understand what they were saying, meaning he was in the back of the room where the the dunces set, okay? He is not the big student, so Moses is not a comfortable place for Moses to be. And even though he's in the back of the room with everybody else, he doesn't even understand what's going on in the classroom. We've had makers like this, right? What do you mean the final storm? And so Moses' strength waned, and he thought his Torah knowledge was deficient. When Rabbi Akiva arrived at the discussion of one matter, his students said, "My teacher, from where do you derive this?" And Rabbi Akiva said to them, "It is a halakha transmitted to Moses from Sinai." When Moses heard this, his mind was put at ease, as this too was part of the Torah he was to receive. So Moses doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't understand where Akiva is getting any of this stuff. Maybe he's worried that he's making this up, or that he's perverting the tradition. And then when a student asks, he says, it's part of the Torah that Moses handed down. Moses is put at ease and realizes that Akiva isn't inventing new things, he's interpreting what was already there. That he's using that logic, that reason that we saw in the earlier text to derive halachos, to teach laws and to really better understand God's will from the rabbinic perspective. So Moses then is put at ease and realizes that he's sort of in the presence of this great teacher who was able to do things that no other rabbis and even Moses himself were not able to do. So that is how the rabbis see the greatness of Rabbi Akiva. What happens after this in the story is Moses asks, such Torah, what is his reward? Right? What's the end for Rabbi Akiva, this great man? And God shows him Akiva's flesh being weighed out, essentially for dog food in the market. And so he says, God, why somebody who has so much Torah, why does he have this as his reward? And God silences Moses and says, this is how it has arisen in mind. So a tough end to the story that raises all sorts of theological questions about reward and punishment, but does point to the very sad end for Akiva and the disrespect he was shown by the Romans that goes completely against the respect that he was shown by the rabbinic community, the Jewish community. So let's talk a little bit about him versus the Romans. So this is one story of what led to Akiva's end. This also comes from the Talmud. And so it says, the sages taught at one time after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, the evil empire of Rome decreed that Israel may not engage in the study of Torah or the practice of Torah. So that was outlawed for the Jews as a response to this uprising. It's a punishment for it. Papos ben Yehuda came and found Rabbi Akiva, who was convening assemblies in public and engaging in Torah study. So Akiva was not listening to Rome. He was going completely against what the Romans had decreed. And so Papos said to him, Akiva, are you not afraid of the empire? Rabbi Akiva answered him, I will relate a parable. To what can this be compared? It's like a fox walking along a riverbank when he sees fish gathering and fleeing from place to place. The fox said to them, from what are you fleeing? They said to him, we're fleeing from the nets that people cast upon us. He, the fox, said to them, do you wish to come up onto dry land and we will reside together just as my ancestors resided with your ancestors? The fish said to him, you are the one of whom they say he is the cleverest of the animals. You are not clever, you are a fool. If we are afraid in the water, which is our natural habitat, which gives us life, then in a habitat that causes our death all the more so. The moral is, so too we Jews. Now that we sit and engage in Torah study about which it is written, for that is your life and the length of your days, we fear the empire to this extent if we proceed to sit idle from its study, and its abandonment is the habitat that causes our death. So he's saying that the lack of Torah is what the dry land is to the fish. Right, that Torah is our water, and even though it comes with danger, it is what gives us life. So we will not fear the empire, he says. The sages said, not a few days passed until they seized Rabbi Akiva and incarcerated him in prison, and seized Papos ben Yehuda and incarcerated him alongside. So that now this guy who came to Akiva and said, hey, aren't you afraid of the empire? He's also in prison, even though it seems like he wasn't engaging in public Torah study or practicing Torah. So why is he in prison? And we know why Rabbi Akiva is in prison. So Rabbi Akiva said, Papos, who brought you here? Papos replied, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, for you were arrested on charge of engaging in Torah study. Woe unto Papos, who was seized on the charge of engaging in idle matters.
So you can't win one way or the other.
Right, well, right, if you're dealing with Rome, you can't win one way or the other. And so death essentially is the result for both of them, which is sort of what the parable was, right? That the fish were at least at risk of dying either way, but death was assured if they weren't in the water, just as death is assured for Papos, who was not engaged in Torah, right? He was engaged in idle matters, and that led to him being incarcerated as well. So that is, according to the rabbis, what led to Akiva being in Roman hands, in the Roman prison, that he refused to stop studying Torah, to stop teaching and practicing, that he remained his rabbinic self throughout his life, even when it came at great danger. And that he essentially knew that this was going to be his end at the hands of the Roman Empire.
This is like, I don't know how many years, but 2,000 years before, like what happened in the Inquisition in Portugal and Spain.
Yeah,
There's an analogy there that you could make.
right. It's one example of Jews being oppressed for being Jewish and for engaging in Jewish practice. And Inquisition is definitely another one where it was outlawed, right? And so some people left, many people left, some people went into hiding and practiced the Judaism in secret, which had its own risks, absolutely. So yes, one example, unfortunately, of many Jews being persecuted for being Jewish. We have another example, actually an earlier example coming up next month, the story of Torah, and we can point to many, many others. Hanukkah story as well, right? So now he is imprisoned. He's coming out to be executed by Rome. This is a famous story about how even in that moment, Akiva maintained his identity and his kept looking at text and his life experience to gain more meaning from that text. So the Gemara relates, when they took Rabbi Akiva out to be executed, it was time for the recitation of the Shema. So morning or evening, right? Those were the two times. Those are the two times to recite the Shema. And they were raking his flesh with iron combs, and he was reciting the Shema, thereby accepting upon himself the yoke of heaven. His students said to him, our teacher, even now as you suffer, you recite the Shema? And he said to them, all my days I've been troubled by the verse, which you might know from the Ve'ahavta, right? With all your soul. Which I'll just try to point out the Hebrew. But whole nafshecha, right here, this is where that is, the Hebrew word, right? So he said, what does it mean, b'chol nafshecha? That you shall love Adonai your God with all of your heart, all of your soul, with all of your And so he said, I've been troubled by this verse. What does it mean with all your soul? Even if God takes your soul. I said to myself, when will the opportunity be afforded to me to fulfill this verse? And now that it has been afforded to me, shall I not fulfill it? Okay, so he's interpreting this verse to say, with your every being, your every breath, with even the last one, with all of yourself, how can I not fulfill this verse with the times? He prolonged his uttering of the word echad, one, right? Echad, until his soul left his body as he uttered his final word, echad. A voice descended from heaven and said, happy are you, Rabbi Akiva, that your soul left your body as you uttered echad, as you uttered the word one. So a divine approval of this interpretation and of this action that Rabbi Akiva took. So this interpretation of that verse, that we know that one of the last word or the last things that is supposed to be on the lips of a Jewish person when they are going to die is the Shema. Right, that's part of the deathbed confession, the vidui, is the recitation of Shema, and probably also why we have a bedtime Shema, right? Which you say before we go unconscious and become vulnerable, if there's no guarantee of another day that we recite the words of Shema. It's the last words. If those are to be our last words. So Rabbi Akiva sort of setting the precedent for that. So again, not a happy end for Rabbi Akiva, not a happy story to share, but one example of how the rabbis think about his martyrdom and about his remaining true to himself and to God, even and that kept him in danger, and when he was saying that he was not getting an earthly reward for that loyalty. Let's go to that next text. But I talked a bit about the theme of Rabbi Akiva finding the positive in darkness, right? And so this is an example that comes from another part of the Talmud. So given that I keep saying this is another piece of the Talmud, I think it points to just how important Rabbi Akiva was to the rabbis, that they have these long passages about his life and about his teachings in the Talmud. I think more so than other rabbis. I haven't done any kind of official study, but you don't always get these long passages, especially many of them, about a particular rabbi. So the fact that Akiva has these, I think, points to just how well regarded he was in the rabbinic community. That they wanted to tell all these stories about his life, even if it's not specifically about teaching a particular law, that it's what they call agadic, it's tales about him. Relating stories about your heroes. So it talks about 4 sages, Gamliel, Elazar ben Azariah, Joshua, and Akiva, all traveling together. And they came to Jerusalem, which was now utterly laid to waste. So this is after the Roman destruction, after the year 70. Again, this really calamitous time, and so they're looking at Jerusalem destroyed. They're at Mount Scopus, which I was asked about a year ago for a wedding at Hebrew University on Mount Scopus, and you can see the entire what we now call the Dome of the Rock, right, or what was then the Temple Mount. So you have a very good view of where the temple was. From Mount Scopus, and so it's overlooking this city, and they tore their clothes in grief. And when they saw the Temple Mount, they saw a fox running from the spot where the Holy of Holies had once stood. And they all burst out into tears, except for Akiva, who laughed. So why is Akiva laughing? He sees that what used to be the temple is overrun with wildlife and it's just complete destruction. The other sages said to him, how can you laugh at this scene of such destruction? And he said to them, why do you weep? They replied, we weep for the place which was once the Holy of Holies, which no outsider could enter, now is desolate and inhabited by wild beasts. How could we not weep? That's a natural response to what they're seeing. And he says, and that's why I laugh. I saw enacted before my eyes the terrible words of the prophet Uriah. Zion is plowed over like a desolate field. That gave me faith to hope that I would see the fulfillment of the comforting words of the prophet Zechariah. Once again, the aged will rest in the broad avenues of Jerusalem. So he's saying, if you believe it in this prophecy, and it has come true, we have this other prophecy that hasn't yet come true, right? So now we can have faith. We've seen that God has fulfilled this one, and now we're waiting for God to fulfill this next one. And that's why he's laughing, because he, with great faith, is saying, I believe that this prophecy will come true. And God has shown us that God fulfills prophecies. If the worst of our fears can come true, so too can our greatest hopes. And they said to him, Akiva, you have comforted us. That's the end of the story. So he is traveling with these three other great sages. Gamliel is the head of the Sanhedrin, the rabbinic gathering of 70 elders, right? And so he is probably with the most institutional power. And still Akiva is teaching these greats what it really means to believe, to have faith, and to have hope, right? Even in the face of great destruction and darkness. And so much so that he actually convinces them and brings them comfort in this really dark moment for them. So it's Akiva not just being able to say, I know more Torah than you, or I'm better at interpreting Torah than you, or I have more faith, but actually doing so in a way that can comfort them and convince them, right, rather than heal them. And I think that's the power that we see with Rabbi Akiva, that in many ways, even if he's disagreeing with people, there are multiple stories of him kind of being the peacemaker, as the go-between, the mediator, that he could, in his greatness, say, you're both wrong, I'm right, get in line. But there are many examples of him using that greatness and using his textual skills to bring people together. So there's, I don't remember if I have it in this sheet, but there's a story of two rabbis who are arguing about when Yom Kippur is. And it's based on which witnesses they believe, who say it's a new month, and then you start counting from when they say they saw the new moon, and then so 10 days afterwards it's Yom Kippur. And so depending on who they think is a valid witness, and they have a difference of opinion of who's a valid witness, then they count different days for when it's Yom Kippur. And Akiva comes and essentially says, I think Rabbi Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin, is one of them who's arguing. It might be Joshua, who's the other one who's disagreeing with Gamliel. And he essentially says to Joshua, go along with Gamliel. He might be wrong, but you need to go along with him. In order, for the sake of the rabbinic community, for the sake of the Jewish community, we can't have two different Yom Kippurs. If one person follows Rabbi Gamliel, they do Yom Kippur on this day, and this person, he's like, we can't have that. Just do what he says. It's a little bit more involved than that. It's a little bit nicer than that, but just another example of Akiva bringing people together with his weight, with his greatness, using that for good. So it's another reason why I like to focus on Akiva, because he plays that role between the rabbis. There's another example in a famous Talmudic passage called the Oven of Achnai, where there's a rabbi who's been excommunicated by the rabbinic community, and Akiva is the one who's supposed to go and tell this rabbi the news that he's been excommunicated. Because this excommunicated Rabbi Eliezer, has so much power, the rabbis want to be very careful about how he's told, because he has this like sort of supernatural connection and he can make things happen. And they don't want him to end the world, and so they send Akiva so that he'll ease him into the news, because they know that Rabbi Akiva has that ability. And you know, he has the status, but he also has those personal skills, the personal touch that will lessen the damage that will be done. So I want to talk a little bit about his support of Bar Kokhba, which we sometimes see as a dark spot in his interpretation, in his views, you know, that he was right, it seems, on so many things and respected in so many ways. And he still sort of had this big misstep of, that's an understatement, of believing that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah and supporting him in his revolt against Rome and everything that came after that. So Shimon Bar Yochai, another big one, big guy in the rabbinic community, said, "My teacher Akiva, would you expound on the verse, 'A star has risen from Jacob,' which is from the book of Numbers." When Rabbi Akiva would see Bar Kuzba, who was called Bar Kokhba, which is related to the word star, he would say, "That is the king, the Messiah." And Rabbi Yochanan ben Porta said to him, "Akiva, grass will grow on your cheeks and the son of David will not yet have come." So there's disagreement in here, right? Rabbi Yochanan ben Torta does not believe that Bar Kuzba, who they call Bar Kokhba, is the Messiah. Akiva, it seems, does believe that he is the Messiah, and they're disagreeing. They're saying, you know, Akiva, you're going to be long gone before the Messiah comes. This guy is not it. Okay, but he's using Akiva, it seems, is seeing this text from Numbers as somehow proof that Bar Kuzba is actually Bar Kokhba and is the Messiah. So this is I'm gonna skip over that one because it's a little bit repetitive. And I wanted to share, that's another death story of Rabbi Akiva and about his support for Bar Kokhba. I think we've kind of covered that. And wanted to share maybe perhaps his most famous teaching, just to get a sense of, you know, we've looked at some of his life, some of his death. What are some of the things we're left with from how he interpreted Torah? And he believed that this text, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," which comes in the holiness code of Leviticus, is "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," that this is the greatest principle in the Torah. Right? Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is the biggest, the greatest thing in Torah. And so this is, if you've encountered a teaching of Rabbi Akiva, it's likely that it's this one, but this piece of Torah is central to the entire Torah itself. Why? What's so great about this text? Anybody? Why might this be, you know, out of all the different halachot, all the different mitzvot, all the stories, everything we have in Torah, why would this be central?
Is this one of the 10 commandments?
It's not one of the 10 Commandments. So the 10 Commandments we first get in Exodus and then again in Deuteronomy. So love your neighbor as yourself is not, it's instead this list of mitzvot called the Holiness Code. Other things in the Holiness Code are like, you shall not place a stumbling block before the dumb, before the blind, or insult the deaf. And you shall be holy, for Adonai your God is holy. It talks about how to treat people who are less fortunate in our community. But then we also have this statement of loving the neighbor as yourself.
Well, it seems to be a repeat of what was also seen recently in this time period as a false messiah of what Jesus said, right?
Ah, okay. So
Oh, so a very, like, one of the most quoted sayings of Jesus is, well, some of it would have to go usually, but it's like this.
something along these lines.
Yeah. Love your neighbor as yourself,
Yeah.
like this is the law wrapped up, or.
Yeah. Okay, so
Alex,
around the same time as well, right? A little bit earlier than Rabbi
Yeah,
Akiva,
yeah.
but around the same time. And
Alex and Ruth have their hand up, you
Cool.
can't see, but.
Ruth and or Alex.
Yeah, just, well, two things. One is also Hillel does the same thing, but just as a point of reference for anybody who wants to look at it, the Holiness Code is the Torah reading for Mincha and is in the Machzor if you want to refer to it for Yom Kippur Mincha.
Yes.
This is Alex adding. For me, in many respects, all of the other principles in the Holiness Code are predicated on this one. So that this is the root of, do not place a stumbling block before the blind, have honest weights and measures. So that would be my reason why Akiva says that.
Why is everything else rely on this?
If you don't, you can't have a society.
So love has to be that foundation.
Or if you take it the other way, if you don't love yourself and you don't love your neighbors, then you've got a real problem. But it also instructs us to love ourselves and go back to that, because we have that divine spark within us. We can love ourselves or learn to love ourselves, and then if we love others as we do that, then we have a society that where everybody can flourish.
Right, the text could have ended with Ve'ahavta l're'echa, right, love your neighbor. Right, that could have been the commandments. But it adds one more word, just kamocha, like yourself, or as yourself. And so that additional word, in the rabbinic understanding, nothing in the Torah is superfluous. That everything has to have a purpose for reading, right? Why does it say kamocha? You have to love yourself if you are also going to properly love your neighbor. That if you are only loving outwardly and not inwardly, then we're not perhaps loving properly or fully. That love of self is hopefully instructive how to love the other, right? The one who is not you. So maybe it's because of that extra word that Akiva thought that this was the essence, right? This is the core for Torah, that it didn't end to just love your neighbor. We have a lot of examples of, you should love the widow, you should love the orphan, you should, and we have lots of examples of that in the Torah, but the fact that this one says kamocha, like yourself, shoots it into greatness.
Was it also just about keeping the peace? They seem to be like that was like important in his life, to kind of just like respect others, but also have your own boundaries kind of mindset.
Yeah, I think so, that we're seeing this theme, right, throughout his teaching and his the example that he gave with his life is certainly loving others, right, and being that peacemaker, but having a sense of self as well and loving that self. And when the time comes to stand firm with oneself, not in a antagonistic way, right, but a place of authority and weight, and being able then to go out and do that peacemaking, with a sense of self. Say, I have a role here, rather than shrinking back. Go to Pesach. To you, an example of Rabbi Akiva around the time of Passover. This comes from, again, the Talmud, from Pesachim, and the tractate that deals with Pesach. It was taught in a Baraita meeting, in an earlier Mishna era text. They said about Rabbi Akiva that in all his days, he never said to his students that the time had come to arise from their learning in the study. Instead, he would continue to teach as long as they are willing to listen. So, he never said, okay, that's our time. Right, he would never tell them it was time to get up and leave, as long as they wanted to learn. And this was true except for the eves of Passover and the eve of Yom Kippur, when he would stop teaching. And the Gemara then, so this is the later layer of text that comes to explain that earlier, or right, that earlier text. So why in Passover and Yom Kippur? The Gemara says, on the eve of Passover, he would stop on account of the children, so that they would go to sleep during the day, and they would not be tired and sleep at night. Right? Because the Seder, which happens in the evening, one of the purposes of it, perhaps the main purpose, is to elicit questions from the younger generation, right? And to tell them the story of the Exodus. And so you don't want them sleeping through it. So you can't have, the parents of these children who are Akiva's students get home so late on Erev Pesach that the kids will be asleep when it comes time for Seder. So that's the explanation for why he would have them go home early enough on Erev Pesach so that they can have their full Seder and have the children awake for it. And then on the eve of Yom Kippur, he would stop so that his students would remember to feed their children. Because Yom Kippur is a fast day, and he doesn't want them to get home so late that their children go hungry when the fast begins. This text, I love that he's thinking about children, right? So, we had at the beginning, like, is he a family man? Is he, it's like abandoning his family to go study, but then he's sort of trying to right that wrong by sending his students home when he himself wasn't really able to go home and be with his family. So maybe this is a corrective for what he experienced, right? Maybe he's saying, I don't want to be like my teachers who didn't let me go home. I don't know if that's a fair account of what happened, but very different that he's sending them home so that they can care for their children. Granted, it's only like a couple days a year. But he's at least thinking about the children's needs, right? The needs of the next generation. So it seems it has an eye towards the future, right? It's getting 24,000 students. It is continuing to teach, even when it's a dangerous thing to do, and in thinking about the next generation and their holiday experience, which even if it diminishes the amount of Torah that those parents are receiving on that very day. Just go to one more, and I think this goes along with this theme, right? Of back here. Rav Huna said, that Rav said, that Rabbi Meir said. So we have this long line of where this text came from, where this story came from, and kind of passed along through the generations. Just taught in the name of Rabbi Akiva. One must always accustom oneself to say, everything that God does for the best. So that's, again, the Baraita, the earlier text that we have in teaching from Rabbi Akiva. And then the Gemara comes to explain what that means. So this is a later layer. Like this incident, when Rabbi Akiva was walking along the road and came to a certain city and inquired about lodging, and they did not give him any. Another parallel to the Jesus story. He said, everything that God does for the best. He went and slept in a field, and he had with him a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. As you do. A gust of wind came and extinguished the candle. A cat came and ate the rooster, and a lion came and ate the donkey. And he said, everything that God does for the best. That night, an army came and took the city into captivity. It turned out that Rabbi Akiva alone, who was not in the city and had lit no candle, had no noisy rooster or donkey to give away his location, he was saved. And he said to them, didn't I tell you that everything God does for a reason? So, God does for the best, right? So that, again, this theme that we see in Rabbi Akiva of finding light in the darkness, right? Of finding goodness when it seems like there isn't much to celebrate. So we have many of examples of these kinds of teachings from him that I think paint a good picture of his worldview that I wanted to share.
I'm just curious, were lions ever in this area of the world?
Well, I think there are like more mountain lions kind of things. I mean, we definitely hear about like the Lion of Judah, and there are many texts that talk about like the lion's whelp or the lion's roar. So yeah, I don't think like big lions like we think about Simba and Mufasa, but big cats. I don't. What have you?
This story to me almost seems like it could be a children's story, like that, just
Yeah.
that little piece, like a short little children's story.
Yeah, you can see this being illustrated, right, and told to kids, absolutely. And we do have some of that in rabbinic texts, not all of it is the destruction of the temple.
This is actually a very famous Chinese, story that's used in Zen a lot, and it's almost exactly the same.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thanks. There are other rabbinic figures that sort of have this outlook. There's a guy named Nahum Ish Gamzu, and that's his name, and Gamzu translates to also this. And so why was he called this? Because he would always say Gamzo Latova. This is also for good. And it has a story about, whenever he encounters something that says this is also for good, and it shows you how things come out positive. Sort of the other side of Gamze Yavor, this too shall pass, right? Which is, the story of even, the good things to say this too shall pass. And acknowledging that there's negative stuff that comes about too, that's just part of life. But the Gamzula Tova, or, this is all for good, or Akiva saying it's everything God does for the best. A very different outlook than saying that there are actually some really negative things. So an interesting worldview to have from Rabbi Akiva, who did in his life experience such suffering and pain for himself and for the Jewish community at large. So instructive, I think, because he didn't live in always wonderful, lovely times, and still had this outlook, right? And I need to remind myself that's we'll stop looking at some text. We could keep going and going as you might gather. There are lots and lots and lots of texts about Rabbi Akiva and his teachings. These are some of the core ones, but there are many others. But any final reflections, reactions, about what we've learned or things that you know about Rabbi Akiva that we didn't talk about.
I'm wondering if the very first story where Elijah appeared, that's what's wrong, if that was like a first test to like see how little he would be okay with having. Be like, if all you have is like $5, are you still willing to give that $5 away to somebody because you at least have clothes kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Like, what if he wasn't willing to give away the straw? They're like, nope, not him, he's not good enough.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think, in thinking about the origin story nature of this, that there are tests that come along with that and the test of humility, the test of, are you okay with, if your life's path leads to poverty, are you okay with that? Are you only studying Torah with the hope that you'll gain status and recognition and wealth? Then, maybe it's not going to be this great sage. It's not doing it for the right reasons. So yeah, I think that is a bit of a test that he passed.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for spending some of this afternoon, learning about Rabbi Akiva with me and
Thank you.
hopefully getting
Thank
some
you.
life lessons for ourselves from his life story.
Yeah.
Hopefully not ending in the same